Well, this is the second part, why wages vary, workers, jobs, institution, and discrimination. And in this part, we just talk about the discrimination, why the pays for a same skill set or a same human being is differentiated. So, discrimination, treating people differently based on characteristics such as their sex, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, disability, social class, or other factors. So these are the grounds on which employers can discriminate, which is not socially or legally acceptable, but people do that. So before, despite anti-discrimination laws, discrimination persists, and study shows that discrimination does affect wages. Before diving into market effects, let's examine the sources of discrimination. So, social scientists have identified four key sources of discrimination. The number one is prejudice, and number two is implicit bias. Number three is statistical discrimination, and number four, institutional discrimination. Now, prejudice, a negative attitude towards someone based solely on their membership of a particular group. Economists sometimes call this state based discrimination, highlights that decisions are not based on reason, rather, decisions are based on preferences, someone's preferences. So, prejudice is costly from a profitability standpoint because employer decrease your chance of finding the most productive worker, because if you have some prejudice against any particular group, maybe those the efficient workers are in that particular group is. So artificially decrease the labor supply, pushes up workers wages, and potentially profitable hiring strategy, hire people that other employers are prejudiced against them. So it's for other, there is a maybe possible their talent and productivity had gone overlooked by some because of the prejudice approach of the employer. Now, the second is source that can be a implicit bias. Despite trying not to be biased, your snap judgment may reflect implicit or unconscious association. So, implicit bias judgment shaped by the unconscious attribution of a particular qualities of a member of specific group. Employers' judgment fool them into overlooking talented workers. So here is an example, orchestrating impartiality to reduce instances of implicit bias or prejudice. Employers can hide the gender, race, and other irrelevant characteristics of an applicant. And musicians audition behind a screen, or so orchestra conductors may make decisions solely on what they hear or listen, not and this is what we call it as a blind audition, and this happens sometimes in many other circumstances as well. For example, to marking or grading some exams, so their names are not there, so you just do blindly. So they have found that more women end up by getting hired. So this is what we can find out the ways to reduce this implicit bias. Then there is a statistical discrimination. When employers do not have a lot of information about job applicant, they rely on stereotypes. Why? The reason is that it can be statistically accurate on average, even if it is inaccurate for a specific individual. On average, that can be possible, true. But when you are judging on the average basis to a particular employee, then it is not it is not necessary. It can be a true. So, statistical discrimination, using observation about the average characteristics of a group to make inferences about an individual. An employer is looking to hire a worker for a job with a lots of travel. So, inference biased on gender, women tend to be primary caregiver and may therefore be reluctant to spend long periods away. So, if this inference leads the firm to hire a man instead of an equally qualified woman, then they are discriminating. And concern, while it is not profitable to rely on inaccurate stereotypes, if information is too costly to gather, then employers may stick to the statistical discrimination. So if there is an overall general impression about any particular group of people, and you use that reference for deciding against that group, that is what we call it as a statistical discrimination. The fourth one, source of discrimination, is institutional discrimination, and this is a very hot topic in many areas. Like we talk about that our police is very commonly discussed in US about the police police discrimination against the black people, and you can heard many famous cases. So this is what we are saying. Racism can be associated with the system rather than individual, which go on to perpetuate bias and disadvantage. So institutional discrimination, bias against disadvantaged groups, that is embedded in laws and institutions. Drug laws, example, harsher sentences for posing a crack cocaine common in black communities than for a powder cocaine common in white communities. So this is a harsh sentences. Criminal record make it harder to find steady work. So this is also one of the institutional discrimination of a criminal record. Redlining, denying loans to people based on where they live rather than and their own credit worthiness. So some localities, some neighborhoods are identified as these are not. So even some very good credit worthy and a very gentleman is living, or a person, very nice person is living there, but they are not going to get it because they are living in a such neighborhood. So that's what we call it as a redlining. Origin in the 1930s, literally red lines were drawn around neighborhoods that were deemed a credit risk by the government. So, contained disproportionately black families, the legacy under investment in those neighborhoods, worse professional and financial outcomes, less investment in public schools since U.S. public schools are funded by the local tax. Now, wage by demographic groups. So we can see also by demographic groups, and very clear discrimination here we can observe between men and women. So men has a average, and that's a very latest data. It's not so old data, 2021. So on average, the man is earning around $1,094 as compared to 899 weekly earning. This is a weekly earning. If we do it on the basis of ethnicity, this is a statistical information. It's not information which we gathered by ourselves. So it's from the tax or from other sources which are reliable. So by race or ethnicity, Asians are getting 1,281, white people are getting 1,012 on average, and black is 799 and Hispanic is 779. But again, this data is from US, not from Canada. So measuring discrimination, a word of caution. So be careful when interpreting data. One group earning less in the labor market is not necessarily evidence of a discrimination. Wage vary due to difference in labor demand and human capital. How do employers value your skills as a worker? Labor supply and compensating differential, job different, pay different wages. That is also institutional factors. Do unions give workers in your field a boost in bargaining power? And discrimination, are people or a system acting as additional obstacle to your success? The goal, better prepare you to access the strength and the weakness of the evidence someone present to you. How the economist can deal with these problems when they are doing some research on this area. Studies that control for various factors compare people who are similar in their those specific dimensions. For example, if the study controls for age, education, and occupation, take similar age people with a similar education and in the same occupation and see what difference remains. Studies that control for difference in human capital and jobs still see wage differences between group remain, but those wage gaps tend to shrink. No study is perfect, so difficult to definitely conclude remaining wage differences is due to discrimination unobserved factors, ability, effort, quality of education, etc., may explain the remaining wage gaps. And studies may also understand discrimination. Controlling for occupation does not account for scenarios in which discrimination make it harder for women or any other group to enter high wage occupation. So there is also these the gender wage gap, and we just saw here about 18% is a gender based gap. So it is unlikely that the gap is entirely due to discrimination. Reflect different job skills and choices men and women tend to have, and women tend to obtain more education, work in lower paid occupations, work fewer hours because the um, partly due to main caregiving obligations. Many of the different choices women make are themselves as a result of discrimination. So primary reason women give for a living computer science job is hostile work environment. So take away unobserved factors and characteristics means it is possible that the additional studies could find either a smaller or a larger gender pay gap. So this is all what we want to discuss about from the labor market. Again, the issues related to labor market. So in third part, we will talk a little bit more about it, and then